Memandangkan harga beras telah meningkat 2.4% tahun.
Tapi harga makanan naik.
Yang dikatakan berpunca daripada peningkatan harga bahan mentah.
Seen several items in the market like vegetables, bread and other food items increase in prices recently.
In Malaysia, the rising price of food has become one of the clearest signs of how economic forces shape everyday life. Over the last several years, households across the country have noticed their grocery bills and favorite meals becoming more expensive. Bank Negara Malaysia reports that between 2020 and 2025, food prices rose by about 17.5%, outpacing the growth of wages and tightening the budgets of many families. This steady increase isn't random. It reflects a chain of economic pressures building up across the food system. Every price tag begins at the source. Farmers and producers face higher costs for fertilizer, animal feed, machinery, and energy. These rising input costs create what economists call cost-push inflation, where producers are forced to raise prices simply to stay afloat. Transporters then add their layer of cost, driven by fuel prices, logistics challenges and currency fluctuations affecting imported goods. By the time food reaches markets, restaurants or hawker stalls, the accumulated costs have made even simple dishes noticeably more expensive. But higher costs alone don't tell the full story. Demand for essential foods remains strong even when prices climb. Families still buy rice, vegetables, bread and basic meals because these items cannot be substituted. This is known as inelastic demand, and it gives rising prices the momentum to persist. Data from the Department of Statistics Malaysia shows that food makes up one of the heaviest components of the consumer price index. When this category increases steadily, it pushes overall inflation higher and reshapes how households plan their spending. These shifts are also influenced by global conditions. Weather disruptions in major supplier countries, fluctuations in global commodity prices and changes in international trade affect Malaysia's food supply. At the same time, domestic factors such as labor shortages, exchange rate movements and local production policies determine how sharply these global pressures are felt at home. Together, they form an interconnected system where local prices reflect both Malaysian realities and worldwide trends. This documentary explores the main course of food prices rising, why food prices continue to rise, who is affected by rising food prices, and how to cushion the rising food price. Behind every meal lies a story of supply, demand and the broader economy that touches every household in the nation.
If your grocery bill keeps rising, you're not alone. Food inflation is a growing crisis in Malaysia, squeezing family budgets and driving up the cost of living. We're looking at the two major forces behind this crisis, which is eroding the purchasing power of your ringgit. The first major driver is imported inflation, driven by our currency. Since Malaysia relies heavily on imported food and raw materials, a weaker ringgit makes foreign goods much more expensive to bring in. This hits businesses that rely on imported raw materials like livestock feed, causing rising production costs that are passed directly to us. While global food prices have been easing, down 1.2% in November 2025 according to the FAO, the weak ringgit still negates much of this benefit for Malaysian consumers. The second key factor is supply chain instability and scarcity. When the movement of food is halted, the supply shrinks. Natural disasters, particularly the recent heavy floods in late 2025, have repeatedly devastated local production. For example, recent flooding in Kedah and Perlis wiped out over 3,000 tons of rice and caused millions of ringgit in agricultural losses. When supply suddenly drops, but demand stays high, prices spike. This economic effect is called demand pull inflation, where consumers effectively compete to pull the limited prices higher. Besides, this crisis doesn't affect everyone equally. It hits the B40 or lower income households the hardest. Data shows the poorest households dedicate around 31% of their income to food, severely eroding their quality of life. Even though overall food inflation eased to 1.5% in October 2025, restaurant and accommodation services inflation was much higher at 3.4%, highlighting that the cost of eating out, a necessity for many B40 and M40 workers, is still spiking due to high operating costs. This pressure forces impossible trade-offs, cutting back on healthcare or their children's education, raising serious concerns about national nutrition.
Rising food prices affect everyone, but not equally. In Malaysia, the hardest hit are the B40 group, the bottom 40% of earners. Because food takes up a large share of their income, even small increases matter. In October 2025, the Department of Statistics Malaysia reported that fish and seafood prices rose 1.7%, while oils and fats climbed 1.5%. For B40 families, these numbers are not just statistics. They mean less nutritious meals and tough trade-offs. Sometimes cutting back on healthcare or education just to afford food. Middle-income households feel the squeeze too, but they can adjust, swapping expensive items for cheaper ones, or dipping into savings. High-income households, on the other hand, barely notice. Food costs are a small part of their budget. Businesses such as restaurants and food stalls face rising costs for essentials, like cooking oil and seafood. Many raise menu prices, passing the burden back to consumers. Farmers may earn more, but higher costs for fertilizer, fuel, and labor mean they don't always benefit. At the national level, food inflation drives headline inflation, forcing Bank Negara Malaysia and policymakers to act. Subsidies, price caps, and food aid programs help, but they strain the budget. Globally, the FAO reported food prices fell to 126.4 points in October 2025. Yet Malaysia's own data shows families here are still struggling. Rising food prices are more than numbers. They shape daily life, health, and social stability.
Higher food prices in Malaysia create a growing problem, which affects families and puts pressure on their daily living costs. Because food exists as a basic need, any price increase directly harms the quality of life for many people, which is worse for those facing financial hardship. Finding answers needs help from government and business and the community. The government has a key part in dealing with food price inflation. One working method is giving direct aid for basic foods like rice and cooking oil and chicken. This aid helps make sure essential items stay affordable for poor families. The government can make rules stronger which stop unfair price jumps by shops. Boosting the nation's own food production is another key action the government can take. Malaysia relies too much on foreign food, which means world issues like supply chain breaks and money value changes can make prices jump. The country can boost its self-sufficiency and reduce import reliance by helping farmers with money support and education plans and new farming tech. Moreover, companies also have a role in helping people handle higher food prices. Stores can offer cheaper options like budget items and varied package sizes which fit various budgets. Promotional discounts and bundle deals and loyalty programs help customers with the financial strain. Businesses can also work more efficiently to lower their own running costs. Retailers can hold prices steady without losing money through methods which include better supply chains and less waste and energy-saving systems. Furthermore, people must change their spending habits to handle rising food costs. Planning meals and comparing prices at different stores and using promotions can greatly lower a family's spending. Choosing local food is helpful since it is usually fresher and less costly, which comes from the lower expense of shipping it to stores. Many families grow vegetables and herbs in home gardens, which is a way to lower their daily food bills. Cooking at home more often instead of buying takeaway food is a good method for saving money and eating healthier. Local efforts from the community are also quite important. Community gardens help people grow vegetables, which makes food easier to get and builds stronger community connections. Food banks and extra food sharing plans support people in need by giving out food from retailers and restaurants which would otherwise become waste. All in all, easing the strain of high food prices in Malaysia needs cooperation from many different groups. Government policies and responsible business practices and informed consumer choices and community support all build a complete method which manages this issue. Although rising food costs may continue to challenge many homes, these combined efforts help lessen financial pressure and build long-term food security for the nation.
The continuous rise in food prices has become a significant economic challenge in Malaysia, imposing considerable financial strain on ordinary households and weakening consumer purchasing power, especially for lower and middle-income groups. The increase in the food and beverages category by an estimated 17.5% between 2020 and 2025 notably outpaced wage growth, underscoring the severity of the issue. The two main drivers behind this crisis are imported inflation, resulting from Malaysia's heavy reliance on imported goods and the weaker ringgit, and supply chain instability and scarcity, often triggered by natural disasters like floods that devastate local agricultural production and lead to demand pull inflation. While rising prices affect everyone, the impact is disproportionately severe on the B40 bottom 40% of earners' households, who dedicate a large portion of their income to food. This forces difficult trade-offs, such as cutting back on healthcare or education. Businesses also face mounting operating costs, which are often passed on to the consumer, further fueling the cycle of inflation. Addressing the persistent and damaging impact of high food prices in Malaysia requires a collective effort across three key sectors. The government has a fundamental role to play by implementing working methods such as providing direct aid for basic foods like rice, cooking oil, and chicken to ensure essential items remain affordable for poorer families. Simultaneously, the government must strategically boost the nation's own food production and support farmers to reduce reliance on foreign food imports, which are vulnerable to world issues and currency fluctuations. Businesses must contribute by adopting responsible practices, which include offering cheaper options like budget items and varied package sizes, and working more efficiently to lower their own running costs through improved supply chains and less waste. Finally, individuals must adapt their consumption habits to handle the rising costs by planning meals, comparing prices, choosing local food, and cooking at home more often instead of buying takeaway. These combined policies from the government, responsible actions from businesses, and informed choices from consumers are necessary to lessen financial pressure and build long-term food security for the nation. In summary, managing food price inflation in Malaysia demands a good strategy that combines effective government policies, responsible corporate practices, and informed consumer choices. These combined efforts are essential to lessen financial pressure on households and build long-term food security for the nation.